541 meters. 632 meters. Two numbers, two towers, two very different moments in history. One World Trade Center rises from a void, not from demand, not from growth, but from loss. Its height is not optimized, it is selected. 1,776 feet, a number chosen to remember, not to compete. Shanghai Tower rises from momentum, from speed, from expansion, from the belief that height itself signals arrival. No tragedy preceded it, no absence demanded it. One tower was shaped by caution, by the need to prevent collapse before it happens. The other was shaped by confidence, by the assumption that limits can be managed. One was designed to absorb fear, the other to demonstrate control. Both dominate their skylines. Both are presented as symbols of national strength. But skyscrapers do not only reflect engineering. They freeze decisions into concrete and steel. The question is not which tower is higher. The question is this: when a nation builds upward, is it trying to preserve what was lost or trying to prove it has already moved on? One World Trade Center did not begin as a real estate proposal. It began as a problem without a clean solution. After September 11th, the site was no longer just land. It became a national question. What should be rebuilt, who should decide, and what meaning the structure should carry? The pressure came from every direction. Families of victims demanded reverence. City officials demanded functionality. Federal agencies demanded security. Developers demanded economic viability. Commuters demanded that Lower Manhattan work again, every morning without ceremony. These demands did not align. They collided. The project was forced to satisfy grief and finance in the same footprint. From the beginning, height was symbolic rather than practical. The number 1,776 feet was not chosen for efficiency. It was selected to anchor the building to a historical narrative, a declaration encoded in measurement. That symbolism created friction, because symbols invite scrutiny. Design choices were not treated as private decisions. They were treated as public statements. Each revision had to answer two audiences at once: a market that wanted rentable floors and a city that wanted a moral center. Time became part of the origin story. Debates over design, memorial space, transit links, and responsibility slowed momentum. Not because the engineering was impossible, but because the legitimacy had to be shared. Security then hardened the concept. The base, the setbacks, the structural redundancies. The tower was designed not only to stand, but to absorb risk, to remain functional under stress, to signal that collapse would not be repeated on the same terms. Unlike earlier American skyscrapers, this one was not born from a race against another skyline. It was born from an absence that refused to stay empty. One World Trade Center exists because a void demanded an answer. Not growth, not expansion, but the insistence that loss would not be the final architecture. It had to be a workplace, a memorial neighbor, a transit node, and a message visible from miles away that the city still governed its own horizon. Shanghai Tower emerged from a fundamentally different context. There was no trauma to resolve, no symbolic ground to reclaim, no collective wound. Instead, there was momentum, a city repositioning itself at high speed. By the early 2000s, Shanghai had already been designated as a future global financial center. Pudong was not evolving organically, it was being constructed deliberately. Towers were not simply buildings, they were milestones in a timetable. The origin, therefore, was strategic rather than emotional. A coordinated vision to anchor Shanghai among the world's premier cities and to concentrate finance, corporate headquarters, and global visibility in one district. Where New York rebuilt to restore continuity, Shanghai built to compress time. Height mattered because height communicates. To investors, to institutions, to rival cities. A tall tower is a broadcast signal. It says the city expects to host capital, talent, and decision-making. The governance model reduced uncertainty. Approvals, land use, and financing were aligned early, so the project could move as a single system rather than a public argument. The question was rarely, should we build this? It was, what does the skyline need to say next? Shanghai Tower also had a local competitive logic. It was meant to complete a vertical trio in Pudong, with each generation pushing farther than the last. Not just higher, but more modern, more efficient, more globally legible. Where One World Trade Center answered a question posed by history, Shanghai Tower posed a question to the future. How far could centralized planning push vertical urbanism? How efficiently could complexity be managed at scale? How quickly could ambition be translated into form? Shanghai Tower exists because growth demanded expression, because velocity required a marker, because standing still was never considered an option. In that sense, the tower was less a response to need than a tool of positioning, a way to convert economic trajectory into a single, unmistakable silhouette. One World Trade Center was built through a layered process of negotiation rather than acceleration. The method reflected the system behind it: multiple stakeholders, overlapping jurisdictions, and a constant tension between public legitimacy and private execution. Design authority was fragmented. Developers managed cost, contracts, and leasing logic. City agencies enforced zoning, transit integration, and street-level circulation. Federal authorities imposed security requirements that reshaped the base of the building. Each layer added constraints. None could be ignored. Security became structural, not an add-on, but a governing principle. The tower's lower levels were reinforced and distanced from the street. Critical systems were separated and duplicated. Stairwells, cores, and mechanical routes were planned with failure scenarios in mind. Circulation paths were designed to reduce vulnerability before maximizing efficiency. These decisions slowed progress, not because the engineering was beyond reach, but because consensus had to be built alongside concrete. Public hearings, redesigns, and political bargaining became part of the construction sequence. So did disputes over what belonged on the site: commerce, commemoration, or both. Market logic remained present, but secondary. Floor plates were optimized for long-term tenancy rather than maximum density. The spire added height without adding usable space. It was symbolic by design, not a yield calculation. Even the language around the project carried weight. A tower could not feel like a provocation. A memorial could not feel like a delay tactic. Procurement followed standard American practice: competitive bidding, compliance reviews, legal exposure managed through documentation rather than command. When problems emerged, the response was procedural. Engineers revised, contractors resequenced, agencies reapproved. Time became a cost absorbed by the system. Delays were tolerated because legitimacy mattered. The building could not move faster than public acceptance allowed. The method also reflected how American megaprojects protect themselves. Insurance, liability, and political accountability sat in the background of every major choice. A safer design reduced not only physical risk, but reputational risk. And reputational risk was treated as a cost, just like steel and labor. That is why the process felt heavy, because the tower was built under the assumption that every step would be questioned later. Shanghai Tower followed a fundamentally different method. From the outset, authority was centralized. Planning approval, financing, land allocation, and construction oversight moved within a coordinated framework. This alignment reduced friction before ground was broken. Speed was not an outcome, it was an assumption. Design and execution progressed in parallel. Engineering decisions were optimized for scale and efficiency rather than public reassurance. The tower's twisted form reduced wind loads, lowering structural stress at extreme height. That geometry also enabled material savings. Technical solutions replaced debate. Risk was managed internally, not through public review, but through redundancy, simulation, and system control. If a constraint appeared, it was treated as an engineering variable, not a political controversy. State-aligned capital insulated the project from short-term market pressure. There was no requirement to pre-fill office space before construction advanced. Vacancy risk could be absorbed longer. The project was justified as positioning, not only as cash flow. Labor, materials, and scheduling were synchronized. Large suppliers and contractors were coordinated to keep the vertical rhythm continuous. Delays were treated as technical problems, not public events. Once the direction was set, reversal was unlikely. Innovation was encouraged within boundaries. The tower incorporated energy efficiency, vertical zoning, and mixed-use integration, not as experiments, but as demonstrations of capability. Elevator systems, climate control, and facade design were framed as national competence in built form. Public visibility came after completion. The project was presented as a result, not a proposal. The skyline changed first, the explanation followed. The method also relied on the idea that a skyline is infrastructure. A landmark attracts tenants, tourism, and prestige even when utilization is uneven. So construction prioritized completion and visibility. The tower had to exist first so the district could orbit around it afterward. In that sense, the build was a policy instrument as much as a development project. One World Trade Center did not become what its height suggested. In practice, it became quieter than expected. The tower functions, offices are occupied, transit flows beneath it, visitors ascend to the observation deck, but its primary role is symbolic rather than catalytic. It did not recenter American finance. It did not trigger a new vertical race in Manhattan. It did not redefine how skyscrapers are built in the United States. Instead, it stabilized a place. Lower Manhattan recovered, but gradually. Growth came from many smaller decisions, not from the tower alone. In this sense, One World Trade Center absorbed pressure rather than generating momentum. Security and memory remain embedded in its use. The building is present, but careful, visible, but restrained. Tenants operate within a structure designed to minimize shock. Redundancy, separation, and control shape daily routines in ways most occupants never consciously notice. The tower works precisely because it avoids drama. As a national symbol, it communicates endurance. Not dominance, not acceleration, but continuity. That message is stable, but also limiting. Once a building is defined by what it replaces, its future role narrows. It must remain appropriate. It must remain serious. One World Trade Center succeeded in closing a chapter without reopening the wound. But it did not attempt to open a new one. Its consequence, therefore, is containment of memory, of risk, of expectation. It stands as a completed answer, not an evolving question. Shanghai Tower produced the opposite effect. Its presence reshaped perception before it reshaped usage. The tower instantly recalibrated Shanghai's skyline. It signaled parity with global financial capitals. Height itself became a credential. In functional terms, results were mixed. Office occupancy rose gradually, not immediately. Some spaces remained underutilized longer than projected. But utilization was never the sole objective. The tower anchored identity. It confirmed Pudong as a completed statement rather than a work in progress. The district no longer needed explanation. The silhouette explained it. As infrastructure, the building demonstrated system capacity. Advanced elevators, energy management at scale, vertical zoning that treated height as a logistical variable, not an obstacle. As a symbol, it communicated control. Not resilience, not recovery, but confidence in coordination. The tower did not ask for permission. It did not invite reinterpretation. It simply existed and expected the city to adjust around it. That expectation carried risk. When growth slows, landmarks built for momentum can feel oversized. When demand shifts, scale becomes harder to justify. But those risks were accepted up front, because the true output of Shanghai Tower was not rent. It was signal. To markets, to rival cities, to internal audiences measuring national capability. Its consequence, therefore, is projection of capacity, of speed, of centralized effectiveness. Where One World Trade Center closed a wound, Shanghai Tower opened a horizon. Measured by height alone, the comparison feels simple. One tower reaches higher, the other carries a heavier number. The skyscrapers are not engineering problems first. They are decisions made visible. One World Trade Center stands where something ended. Its purpose was not to redefine the skyline. It was to restore continuity. Every element of its existence reflects that choice. The pace, the security, the restraint embedded in its form. It does not attempt to dominate its surroundings. It avoids spectacle, it avoids escalation. In doing so, it reveals a system that moves carefully when meaning is at stake. A system that accepts delay as the cost of legitimacy. A system that rebuilds upward only after drawing clear boundaries around risk. Shanghai Tower tells a different story. It does not respond to an ending, it asserts a direction. Its scale assumes continuation. Its speed assumes coordination. Its form assumes that complexity can be resolved internally before being presented outward. Where One World Trade Center internalizes risk, Shanghai Tower projects confidence. This difference is not architectural. It reflects how uncertainty is managed. One system slows down when the stakes feel existential, the other continues to move. One distributes responsibility through process, the other concentrates it through alignment. Neither approach guarantees success. Each carries trade-offs that only become visible over time. A tower built to preserve meaning may struggle to adapt. A tower built to project power may outpace demand. And as global conditions change, those trade-offs begin to matter more than the skyline itself. What happens when growth plateaus? When memory fades? When security assumptions age? When legitimacy must be renewed rather than inherited? Skyscrapers cannot answer those questions, but they expose which questions a civilization chose to ask at the moment of construction. One World Trade Center asks how to continue after rupture. Shanghai Tower asks how far momentum can carry a system forward. Both answers are incomplete. Both are frozen into steel. That is why comparing these towers is misleading if the goal is to crown a winner. Height does not measure resilience. Speed does not measure sustainability. What matters is alignment between symbolism and function, between ambition and absorption, between what a society wants to show and what it can continue to support. When nations build upward, they are not simply reaching for the sky. They are fixing a moment in place, declaring what mattered most at that time, and trusting that future conditions will not make that declaration fragile. Whether that trust is rewarded is a question no skyline can settle. Only time can. Skyscrapers are often judged by height, but height only tells us how far a structure reaches upward. It does not tell us how long its logic can hold. If you want to understand how nations think, do not look at their slogans. Look at what they choose to build when the stakes are highest. This channel explores those choices across bridges, dams, towers, and systems that quietly shape power. If this comparison helped you see these structures differently, consider subscribing. Not for answers, but for better questions. In the next episode, we will compare two megaprojects built across water, one designed to endure, the other designed to accelerate. And once again, the real difference will not be engineering. It will be intent.